Hi guys, welcome back to the Confused Millennial podcast. I'm Rachel, your host and the blogger behind theconfusedmillennial.com. If you're new to this podcast, it is all about helping you embrace more of who you are while navigating this whole adulting thing. We have amazing guests that are spirituality experts, like our last two episodes with Danielle Page, intuitive astrologist. Your feedback for those episodes was absolutely amazing. So if you missed them, highly recommend you check those out. And if you love those episodes, you'll be happy to hear we have another expert coming on in a couple weeks that is going to be kind of in the same vein. We're going to be shifting gears out of spirituality this week, though. I mean, I guess it's still somewhat in the realm of spirituality because our careers definitely can be a spiritual experience, or the complete opposite, where we need a spiritual experience in our careers. And today I'm talking with career expert Arika Pierce, the author of the Millennials Playbook to Adulting. And we are going deep with lots of actionable advice to help you guys navigate things, embrace who you are, more of who you are in your career. I know, if you know a little bit about my story, I got fired 3 times in a month when I was 25. So talk about a quarter life crisis. And it led me down this path of starting my own company in 2014. So we are definitely going to hopefully remove any shame that you guys have, give you guys some ideas for different ways to approach your career. We cover everything from networking to finding mentors to how to negotiate. And we do talk about negotiating primarily in the 9-to-5 world, but again, it's also some of the same principles can be applied if you own your own business and have to negotiate deals on your own. And we just really go deep on so many different things, from the mistakes that millennials are making today to personal branding and the value of that in our careers. So without further ado, I'm going to just jump right into the interview with Arika. Make sure, I would suggest, if you are not driving, maybe even having a pen and pad ready, because there's going to be lots of actionable things for you guys to take away in this episode. Welcome to the show, Arika. I'm super happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I'm very excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Of course. So millennials and careers, we've made tons of headlines over the years. What do you see as the most common mistakes or problems really coming up for us today?
Well, I think the most common mistakes, or just challenges, I would probably say, in with careers and millennials is, I mean, first, just sort of, figuring out like what you want to do and how you can get from, your college days and your early career days to actually doing something that you enjoy, that you're passionate about, that's aligned with your purpose. And that might change, which I think is okay too. But I think, especially in your millennial, in your early 20s, I should say, it's a good time to really, check out different types of things. And so some of that might be done professionally, as in, through your job, but you also should try to check out different things professionally through, networking, through other interest groups, that type of thing. Just figure out what you like to do and then figure out how you can make money from doing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the most common struggle I hear, the most common struggle I had for myself too. I think because millennials now, like the youngest ones are 22, that a lot are already in their careers and they're in careers that they took when they were first getting out of college and didn't have a lot of experience. So what kind of tips do you have for those people that are in their mid, late 20s and even early 30s now that are just feeling like stuck?
Well, I'm a firm believer in taking time to think. And so I believe that if you take time to think and to strategize about your life the same way you would think and plan for like a vacation, you can make a huge difference. And so in terms of, if you're in your, well into your career, or 5, 6, 7 years into it, it's not too, late to make a change. And don't feel like just because you majored in something and you worked in that industry for, the first few years of your life that you have to stay there. Millennials, unlike other generations, they don't stay at jobs for 30 years. I was in a meeting just yesterday and someone said they had worked for the company for 30 years. And it honestly, it sent this vibe down. Like, I could not imagine working for the same place for 30 years. And so I think, just be open to changing. Be open to having conversations with other people in other industries that you may be interested in. Be open to doing some projects, even at your own company, that may be outside of your department or outside of your skill set. Once at one of my old jobs, I went to my boss and I said, look, I would love to take on a 3-month assignment that's in a totally different department and just see if I like it, because even though I've been assigned to this department and I've been here for 5-6 years, I don't know that I want to spend the rest of my career doing just this, because you get burnt out, you get bored. So I definitely think that just be open and be okay with trying something out and moving to a different place that you may not have thought you would have ended up.
Yeah, I love that you said that too, because, I think I read some statistic a long time ago back in my quote unquote career coaching days, as quickly as those lasted, that like millennials are projected to have something like 7 jobs and 7 to 9 jobs over the course of their lifetime. And essentially, like, if you aren't looking to change jobs every 3 years, you're really putting a ceiling on how much your earning potential.
Absolutely. I mean, my recommendation is stay at a job at least a year, especially in the early stages of your career, because sometimes we can start a job and by day 3, we think, oh my God, there's no way I want to be here for even a week longer, better yet, a few weeks longer or a few months longer. But try to stick it out for at least a year. When people look at your resume, if you have a bunch of 3 months, 4 months, 6-month jobs, that does sort of stand out that you may not be, a stable person and you might not be a dependable person. But a year, I think, is a safe amount of time where you've given it a chance and they've given you a chance. And if you move on, I don't think it's a huge deal. But yeah, I think it's fine to diversify your career and to realize that in order to promote yourself, both professionally as well as financially, you're likely going to have some changes along the way.
Yeah, definitely. Where do you think the role of like personal branding comes into that as far as promoting yourself, like you just said?
So I spend a lot of time talking about personal branding in my book. It's actually the first chapter of the book. And I do a lot of workshops and speaking engagements that are solely focused on personal branding because I think it's so important. I often tell people every decision about your career will likely happen when you are not in the room. And that means even when you are an entrepreneur or even when you are, working in corporate America, and even if you are the CEO, there's still a board or someone that's over you that can make decisions about your career that you will not be a part of the discussion. And so that's why it's so important to make sure you've established a brand that is aligned with who you are. You want to make sure that the characteristics and traits about yourself, both personally and professionally, are all aligned. It's Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, has a great quote that I like to use that is, your brand is what people say about you when you are not in the room. And so that's why, I can say, oh, Arika's dependable. She's always on time. But if everyone around the room when I'm not there says, no, she's always coming in late and she's the last person I would give an assignment to, well, that's my actual brand. Brand is perception. So I believe that it's important to come up with around 3 to 5 characteristics or traits that you want to be known for, and to really focus on making sure everything you do professionally is aligned with those traits. And that means looking at your digital footprint. That means asking people that know you, do you know, if you had to describe me, what are the words that you would use to talk about me? It's doing all of those things to make sure that your brand is aligned and it's the best brand that you can be. I believe you want to have a powerhouse personal brand the same way that a large corporation would.
Yes, I completely agree. It's funny that you used that quote too, because I wrote a blog post on personal branding for yourself, whether you're an entrepreneur, a wantrepreneur, or you plan on staying in the 9-to-5 world, because it is really so important. And I know, being a blogger, I've seen a lot of other people in the blogging community that have chosen to stick with 9-to-5s and just left their blogs as side hustles. A lot of them put that on their resume because it's part of their personal brand. It's part of just showing their work ethic and things like that. So what if you are building this personal brand? Maybe you are really establishing yourself as a thought leader with like a professionally branded Twitter and a professionally branded LinkedIn. and you do have a side hustle. This, I think, gets a little bit sticky to navigate because I've had people that have hired me since I've started my own company for over the last 4 years. And they're like, oh, well, we don't want to put you in as a W-9. We want to put you in as a W-2 because they were really trying to get me to go work full time for them, even though I was making up my own hours and all this stuff. And at the time, I was like, okay, sure, whatever. Like, that's fine for my taxes.
Right.
Like, I'll get the tax benefits of both a W-2 and a W-9. Sure. And come to find out a few months later that they were like, yeah, well, I really liked the fact that you were an entrepreneur, but we were really hoping that you were going to end up deciding to come work for us. And I'm like, what gave you that idea? Like, I was very much in my own thing. So, side hustles, or even if you have your full-time thing and are doing work with companies, like, that's a sticky world to navigate. Any tips, advice?
It's absolutely sticky. So the first tip that I always give is to know what the parameters are with your company. If you do work a 9 to 5, know what you are allowed and not allowed to do. And some people think that there's not any rules, like, oh, it's my free time, I can do whatever I want. It's just simply not the case. I mean, some companies have policies in place that state you cannot have, even a part-time job unless it's, signed off by the company, or you can't work, X number of hours, beyond this if you're not working for the company. I mean, there are rules out there and policy. So you want to first make sure that you don't lose your 9 to 5 job while you're trying to get your side hustle off the ground.
I would always tell my career coaching clients, the first thing you need to do is go get your employee handbook out of the wherever you stowed it away and read through it. Because even if you are starting a side hustle, some companies go so far as if you're starting a side hustle, while you're still working for them, they get a percent interest of equity, or they take ownership of the of your company. So really be clear on that.
Yeah, you want to know that, because again, just because it's your quote unquote free time does not mean that there's not a policy or a rule that can restrict what you do with it. So that's the first thing. So I'm glad you sounds like you've been giving that same advice.
Yes.
And then from there, I think that you want to think about how your side hustle, aligns with what you're doing 9 to 5. You want to make sure that it's not in conflict, of course. I mean, you can't be out there necessarily building out a competitive, market that goes against your 9 to 5 and things like that. But let's say it's totally separate. Let's say, you are doing something that has nothing to do with your 9 to 5 job. From there, I think you just want to be very strategic. I think it is probably the better policy to, in some way run what you're doing by someone within your company that you trust. It may not be your boss, but it might just be someone who is a mentor in your company, or who that, you just have a good relationship with, that can just give you some good feedback. Like, do you think my company, do you think so-and-so will freak out if they find out that I'm doing this on the side? And just start there. And then really make smart decisions. I mean, if you're truly doing something that will cultivate you, professionally, and also build you, out a different skill set, and it's not going to have a negative impact on your company, then that's probably okay. But if you're out there, for example, selling some, really anti-political T-shirts or something like that, and you're the face of the brand, and that could, you start to walk a little bit of a fine line. So I think you want to make those decisions carefully, because at some point, if you are that committed to your side hustle, that you just want to do that with no regard for your 9 to 5, then you might have to give up your 9 to 5. So those are just decisions that you have to think about. I mean, there was a recent article that I read that was saying how millennials really need to rethink, the whole side hustle strategy, because, a lot of times your side hustle is what you feel much more passionate about, and what you enjoy to do much more than your 9 to 5, which is great. But you always have to realize, until your side hustle can be your full income, you are counting on that 9 to 5, paycheck. So you have to kind of balance the two.
Yeah, and I think that, well, where you kind of were just going reminds me too is like, what's the motivation for the side hustle?
Right.
You know, I know a lot of my friends in the blogging world can completely go full time with their blog and YouTube channels, but they just really like having a 9 to 5. Like they like having coworkers. They they literally say to me they would be so bored if they just worked by themselves, as much as they love creating content for these platforms, and they have, you know, almost 500,000 followers. They're like, I just don't want to do this. And so in those situations, if you're really like, this isn't what I want to be doing full time, this is to fulfill a passion, this is for something else, you know, being fully transparent might make more sense for you. But people read through whatever your intentions are, so be really sure what your motivation is.
And I think that that's so important. What's your end game, right? I mean, I worked a few years ago for a healthcare company, and it was during when all of the healthcare reform craziness was happening, and it was super stressful, and I needed a creative outlet. And so I started making these bracelets I started a company actually called Bangalism, and I would put basically these mantras in wood bracelets and such. They actually were pretty cool. And everyone would ask me, like, why are you doing this? And I'm like, I just need something mindless to focus on and a creative outlet to get me out of everything that's happening while I'm at work. Definitely. And, you know, it was nice. And it also ended up being, you know, something to make money doing. But my end game was never to be a professional jewelry maker. So, you know, it was easy to at some point say, okay, well, you know, I'm ready to move on from that. That was, you know, good for that time being, but it wasn't where I wanted to invest all of my time, you know, 100%.
Yeah. And I love that you just brought that up too, because I think there's a lot of pressure out there where everyone like glorifies the entrepreneurial life. And it almost feels sometimes like people are talking down to 9-to-5ers and stuff like that, where I literally was just texting a friend this morning who had her own company for years, and she ended up just taking a job, and she hadn't told me, and it had been months, and she was like, yeah, like it was really tough. Like I was kind of embarrassed for a while, even though like financially she didn't need to. And like, I knew that about her. She just like, she enjoys the corporate job. She got more, and she's like, it's just more fun. It's less stress. Like, that's just what I want to do right now. Like, give people permission to do whatever feels right.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that you brought that up, because I do think that sometimes entrepreneurs, I mean, we can definitely say, you know, I can't believe that you don't want to work for yourself or that type of thing. And, you know, and I believe that everyone has something in them that they could be doing entrepreneurial, but it might not be what they want to do on a full-time basis and be what they, you know, everyone doesn't want the life of, do I get paid this week? Do I get paid next week?
Oh, yeah.
You know, oh, wow, my health insurance has gone up double, and, you know, because I'm having to pay for all of it out of my pocket and that type of thing. So it's not for everybody. And, you know, I do believe that having worked in the corporate world for a long time, I mean, there is something to be said about the stability of a 9-to-5. But, you know, on the entrepreneurial side, I always say I work 5 to 9. I don't work 9-to-5. You know, that's not always attractive either. So.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's completely true. It really ends up there's just so many different variables. And like, I think realizing that things in your life are going to change, your preferences might change. And just like you might switch jobs, you may switch from being an entrepreneur to a 9-to-5er and back again. Like, my husband had his own company for 5 years, and then he had a corporate job for a few years, and he's like, honestly, it's just so nice to not worry about money for like a little while.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, he's back to being an entrepreneur as of yesterday. Actually, he had he had told his boss that he started a new company and he was going to be quitting, and then the company didn't get funding as quickly as he thought, so he had been working there for another month and a half, and he actually got fired yesterday. So I'm like, oh, I thought we were going to have I thought we were still getting your income for another month. So I'm like, oh, that entrepreneur startup life again. Here we go.
Yeah. But just to your point, though, just now, I mean, there's also some, you know, corporate life and 9-to-5 life that has its instabilities as well. So, I mean, I saw that in a way when in some of my last jobs where, you know, things change, you know, as numbers go up and down and they have to make cuts and things like that. So
that's exactly what just happened.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the other side of it. I mean, which is why I think it's always just important to have multiple income streams.
Yes,
And so
totally agree.
I think whether you have a 9 to 5 or whether you're an entrepreneur, you need to have more than one income stream. I'm not saying you have to have 20 different ones, but have something else that you can at least sort of fall back on or focus on, because you just never know when one's going to dry up.
And to tie that all back into personal branding, it's a lot easier to get consulting gigs, which I've had, my husband's had over the years, when you have that established personal brand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That's so true.
Yeah, because actually the W-2 company I was referencing, that was just supposed to be a consulting gig. I literally only did 10 hours of work for a week for them, but for some reason they were like really set on putting me on as W-2. I'm like, I talked to my accountant, he's like, do it if they want to take the taxes, right. Why not? I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So you just never end up knowing what those things are going to really end up being. With kind of all of this, with personal branding, with figuring out what you want to do or what moves you want to make, where does networking is obviously a huge thing. Mm-hmm. And it also stresses a lot of people out. So where do you suggest people start?
So I suggest people start networking in environments that you feel comfortable with from the beginning. Mm-hmm. There's nothing more stressful than walking into a room of people that you feel intimidated by, that you don't know anyone in, that you don't want to really be there in the first place. So, start in places that you at least have some level of feeling comfortable. I think alumni networking events are really are a really good place to start. So, of course, if you live in a major city and you went to a semi large or medium-sized school, it's very easy to find, some folks who went to school with you and that usually have formal networking events that they do in alumni events. And those are great because you already have a common link to the people in the room. And you also, when people find out that you went to a certain school, it's just something, they're more apt to talk to you, to find out if similar people, had professors, things like that. It just, the conversation can be very natural. So that's one place. The other networking events I would recommend, especially if you, are new to networking, are looking at some of the co-working spaces that are popping up across the country. So the WeWorks, those types of places, they do a lot of networking events for the millennial generation, and you don't have to be a part of the co-working space or a member of it in order to go to their networking events. So that's a really good one. And you can just meet a lot of different types of people who are around the same age as you. It's a great place for entrepreneurs, especially because that's who they're really trying to target, or those who, are not really in that 9 to 5 environment, and to bring them together. And then the other thing I would say is to also just think about what do you have interest in, and to see what type of networking groups are out there that are aligned with your interest. And sometimes that can be, you may have an interest in a book that you read and there's a book talk going on, or there is something happening around, the arts or anything like that, or just something, sometimes there's different types of just cool little pop-up exhibits that happen and things like that. And so I think so many times people think of networking in that very formal, everyone has on suits and they're all standing around passing out business cards. That's sort of old school networking. But networking really is just going to different events and activities and being open to meeting new people, and, potentially exchanging information, following up with some of the people that you meet afterwards, maybe having coffee or having lunch, meeting for a drink, something like that. It doesn't have to be that sort of real frumpy, stodgy sort of, brown nosing, the way that we thought about it in the past. When I go to certain events, I try to at least meet 3 people. That's my rule. And I try to, especially if I go with friends, I try to at least just step away from them. Our friends can sometimes be a little bit of a crutch to us, and just go up to someone. My opening line I always say to people is, what brings you here? And so they might say, I just, came because I wanted to meet new people, or they might say, I come to these all the time, or I wanted to, I'm trying to make my way into this new field. I mean, it's an open-ended question that will allow you to at least facilitate a conversation. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing I'll say is, people should always remember, especially if you're at a traditional or a true networking event, people are there to meet people. Mm-hmm. So even going up to a group of people talking and saying, do you mind if I join your conversation? Even though that sounds really uncomfortable, and you probably wouldn't say that at a place like a bar, at a networking event, that's actually, it's okay to say that. Like that's mm-hmm. completely normal and acceptable, because if you're there to meet and talk to people.
I love that. I was actually just interviewed on a podcast, and like he was talking about social media and how like we're all super lonely today. And I was like, I mean, we're all super lonely on social, like you can't blame social media for feeling lonely. They were like, he's like, well, I asked a room of people if they could raise their hand if they had nowhere to go for like Thanksgiving dinner, if they would get invited somewhere. I'm like, well, that's not really a fair question, because if nobody knows that you don't have anywhere to go, and like you have to advocate for yourself, like you have to say like, hey, can I join you for Thanksgiving dinner?
Everyone assumes that you're
what's it called, and like saying, hey, can I join this conversation, like especially when the pretense of it all is to go ahead and do this. Like if you're feeling awkward and uncomfortable, like chances are you're not alone.
Exactly.
Or if they're no longer feeling that feeling, it's because they felt it like the first few times too. Like just that can be an icebreaker. Like these things are really awkward. Like
no, exactly. I mean, sometimes I've said, what brings you here? And people will say, I don't really want to be here. Actually, I just came by. Mm-hmm. And you kind of like, and you say, I actually don't want to be here either. And that just, again, that starts the convo. So I think some people are really good at networking, but some people it takes a little bit more effort. I just think no matter what, always be open to meeting new people and expanding just your network, your base. Mm-hmm. You never know who you might meet. It could be your new best friend. It could be your new travel companion. It could be your next job. I mean, I was talking to someone last week who her son was just bartending after college, trying to figure out what's next and make some money. And he had a conversation with this woman who was just sitting at the bar that has now turned into this really amazing full-time job opportunity for him. Mm-hmm. And so, and just because he's a great networker, they started talking. He was engaging. She said, oh, I have a sales job and I can tell that you have the personality for sales. Would you be interested? And so now he's actually traveling the world, And I was like, maybe I'm going to go work at the bar and see who I can meet. So you just be open. And like I said, everything isn't that, frumpy kind of event. You could be anywhere and network.
Yeah, I like that so much, because I think so often we get this kind of like conference hall room of hundreds and hundreds of people visual in our head when we hear the word networking, which sounds absolutely daunting, absolutely awful. And I think like, listen, I get it. I go back and forth where I can be really on in networking situations. And that's like when I know, okay, I have to go meet this person. Mm-hmm. Like I know I have to be on. And then I can literally like just hide behind my husband, because he's a fantastic networker and we used to work in the same industry. And I was like, I just don't want to talk to people. So like, you're really good at like introducing me around, and then I don't have to do it. And you get all their contact info, and then like I just get all the benefits. So that also can work. So if you have like a wing person.
Hey, that's a partnership.
Yeah. But like you just kind of have to go about these different things. And even though somebody may not directly end up being a positive match for you in the immediate future, you never know how years down the road they could circle back.
Absolutely. And the other thing I always try to do is if I'm talking to someone and they may not necessarily be a I don't want to say a fit, but you know what I mean? They just, there may not be something, we may not have the synergies, but I'm always thinking in my head, okay, is there someone I could introduce them to? Because that's a good way to, you know, again, get them to be thinking about who they could introduce you to as well. And that's how connections start. And so that's sort of the other thing is I never want to just brush someone off and say, oh, that's what you do. Okay, well, never mind. I don't want, you know, that's just rude. And you just never know. And so I'm always like, oh, you know, I know someone who, you know, is doing this. I'd love to put you in contact with them. And so that's a great way to just keep that, you know, conversation going. And then one last thing I wanted to add on the networking is, people always sometimes feel uncomfortable ending a conversation when they're at a networking event or somewhere. And so I always tell people it's okay to say, well, it was great to meet you. I'm going to go, you know, talk to a few other folks, you know, while I'm still here or something like that. Don't feel like you have to talk to the same person all evening or all day, because some people will do that because it eliminates having to do further networking. But it's okay to end the conversation and just keep it moving.
Yeah, I love that you brought up both of those last 2 points, because that's definitely the situation I typically get stuck in, and I usually just use like, oh, I'm gonna go get a refill. I always bring some of you guys may have seen it on my Instagram. I have this white cup so nobody can see what's inside of it. It's like not transparent. I think the word's opaque. I'm kind of like brain farting on things today, but nobody can see how much water I have left. And I always just say, oh, I'm going to go get a refill. Right. I'll catch up with you later. So that's usually my go-to, is holding my sippy cup.
A good one too. Yeah.
What's it called? And then I love the point that you made before that about like, who can I introduce you to? Because that, whether you're at a networking event or you're just emailing back and forth, you know, one of the most common questions I get as a blogger is, how do you get reoccurring brand deals? Like, how does that happen? And generally it's because when I start working with a brand, I say, are you looking for other influencers? Let me know if I can introduce you. Or when I'm not a good fit for a brand deal and I turn them down, but I can tell they're very serious and they're definitely going to be hiring people, I'll say, if you let me know like who it is you're trying to hire for this, like the demographics, I can introduce you to some people. Like constantly offering to introduce to other people is one of the best networking tools that anyone can have. It's so easy to do, and it immediately just starts a working relationship, even if you don't need anything. It's even better when you don't need anything from them at that time.
I agree. Being a connector is such a great quality. Yeah. I mean, there's so many people in my life who have connected me just to all different types of people that, you know, that allow me to have different experiences and different opportunities. And so, you know, I think that that's key. And that's why that's also why I believe it's important to diversify your network and to know different types of people. Because if you only know, you know, if you keep your network small and it's just you and your friends and you guys all know the same people, then, you know, you really are limiting yourself. And so, you know, I even look at some of my mentors and I'm thankful for them because they are plugged into people that are completely different than I'm plugged into. And so that makes a huge difference just in terms of being exposed to different types of people and different types of opportunities.
Totally. I love that. So, well, I want to ask you about mentors since you just brought that up. And that's always like such a Rubik's Cube in my opinion. I've always like, everyone always says, oh, when you're starting out a career, like the first thing you want to do is find a mentor. And I have tried many a time, both when I was in the corporate world and starting out as an entrepreneur, to find a mentor, and everyone is just not into it. So I don't know if it's just like where I live or what, but I find that mentors are really nice to be talked about, but like, how does it actually happen?
Well, so I think, a couple of things. You know, I believe that you should have a personal board of advisors is what I call it. And by that, I mean, you want to have a number of people in your life that can help you, guide you, give you advice, influence you, all of those types of things. And the same way that, a company has different types of people on their board, you want your personal board to also have very different types of people. And I think we immediately, when we think of mentors or personal advisors, we always think of people that perhaps are older than us, that, are in our same field, that are just much more experienced than us. And I think that there is a place for that group of people, but I actually think that you want your personal board of advisors to be made up of all different types of people. So in terms of just your traditional mentors, for me, I have a few, and it doesn't mean that I'm talk to them every single day or every single week or that type of thing. They're just people in my life who I know that if I wanted to call and get advice from, or ask them to go to lunch, or just give them an update on my life, they would be open and ready to receive it and give me their time. Mm-hmm. And they range. I mean, one of them is one of my first bosses when I got out of college. It's funny because, he is just not someone when I first met him that I would have thought, gosh, now 16 years later, we would still be in contact. And he is. I mean, I just, every few months, I email him and I say, his name's Fred. And I say, Fred, can you have lunch? And, and we go out and we just kind of catch up. And he's a mentor. He may not even realize it all the time, but, he's a mentor to me because he gives great advice. He has good insight. He's, he's in his 60s, so he has a lot more experience than me, but he's been great for that. Also, I have an old boss at a company that I worked for that continues to be a mentor to me. Again, for the same reasons. I have an old professor that is a mentor, and so none of these people are actually in my industry. But they are just people who I respect. I respect the decisions that they've made in their careers and that they've made personally. I respect how they've balanced their lives, and that's why they're my go-to in terms of, when I want sort of that higher level, older, expertise or advice. But also, on my board of advisors is my sister. Mm-hmm. My sister is my go-to for almost, anything that I do professionally and personally. I mean everything from, can you read this email before I send it? To, can you, I have a speech to give. Can you sit here and listen to it and give me feedback? I mean, I know she's going to be honest, which is a key to anyone that you consider a mentor or an advisor. You want honest, raw, feedback and support all the time. So that's, someone else that I consider on my personal board of advisors as well. But if you really feel as though you have no one out there, I would just sit back and maybe, again, evaluate who are people in your life. Make a list. I like to think on paper. It's a little old school. Some people like to do everything on their phone, but make a list of 10 people who you've come across in your life who, you just, again, respect their career, or you just look up to, or you just would maybe like to get to know better. Mm-hmm. And I think you'd be surprised that if you, just reach out and maybe not use the word mentor. I think sometimes when you tell someone you're looking for a mentor, it sounds like, oh my God, I have to, have weekly lunches with them and that type of thing. And I think that's where it gets to feel a little bit overwhelming. Mm-hmm. But if it's just someone that you're saying, I just want to catch up, and during that catch up, you tell them what's going on with their life, they're probably naturally, depending on who they are, going to share with you some insights, some opinions, and you just have to keep that relationship going. Mm-hmm. If that is a person that you want to be your mentor, it's really on you to reach out, to update them, to, allow them to be privy to what's happening in your life. A mentor is not likely. Maybe a really good one is going to reach out and find out what's happening with you. But most likely they're really busy, and it's really going to be on you to kind of get on their calendar, to get on their schedule, and just stay in touch and develop a relationship. Okay. And I know I just said a lot, but another thing I would add too, don't ever think that just because they're this just because they're your mentor, that you don't have something to bring to them as well. And so that's the other part. Always be connecting. I mean, I have one of my law school professors. She's running for a office in a law school, a legal trade association. And so she asked me, like, will you come help work on sort of my campaign? And I came up with like video content for her to do. And so, it goes both ways.
Yeah, I like that. No, that makes a lot of sense, because I kind of look at your existing network and see who's already helping you, because you may have mentors that you don't even realize. Okay, so one of the most common questions I get is about negotiating. So what tips do you have for getting paid more, or if the company doesn't have the money, what else can we negotiate? All that fun stuff.
Okay, well, getting paid more is always a priority. So I think it's something that should always be, somewhat top of mind. I mean, look, I always tell people, we could all pretend like we don't work for money, but we need money. So, we can't be afraid to ask for more of it. The first advice I would say is to do your homework. Know what you are worth. It's easy to walk in and say, oh, I believe I should be given $10,000 more a year. Well, it's unlikely unless you have some justification and some, data and that type of information that they're just going to be handing you out an additional $10,000 a year. So, but if you come in prepared, you've done your research, you look at websites like PayScale, Glassdoor, and you really find out what others in your industry are making and what you should be making, that's going to help make your case a lot better than just throwing out a arbitrary number and seeing, if they respond to it. So to me, that's most important. The second piece is really consider what the full package of benefits are. And I know you just said, look at what else besides just your salary is being offered to you, or what else is negotiable. Sometimes companies don't have a lot of room to negotiate salaries, especially if it's mid-year and it's not during sort of the pay raise season. And so look at things like, are they matching your 401k? Are they offering things like tuition reimbursement? Are they offering any stock offerings, equity in the company, things like that? Really look at what the full package is and understand that. I mean, I think now having my own company and being on the entrepreneurial side, I really appreciate all of the benefits that I received in addition to my salary when I was in my 9 to 5, because as you know, those benefits are not quite, the same when you are working for yourself. So really think through, what else can I negotiate outside of my full package? Maybe you want to work from home once a week or something like that. There are other things you can add, tangible benefits that you can really put a price tag on. And then lastly, I would say, really be reasonable in what you ask for. I think, again, sometimes we, just feel like we should be making more, and we just want to go and, say, if you don't pay me this, then I'm leaving tomorrow, but you really have no other job and you don't plan to leave tomorrow. So you want to be reasonable in what you're asking for. And that's why, again, if you've done your homework, if you understand the full compensation package, all of that will show that you've been thoughtful in the process, and you know how to make your case for how much you should be paid.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, because I think too often people go into a meeting where they're like, oh, well, I had a flat tire, or oh, I'm trying to buy a house, or my wife's having a kid, and like, that's why I need a raise. And it's like, okay, well, that's not really the company's problem. And so it goes down to like, when I had a 9 to 5 and I was renegotiating my salary, it was a few different things. One, I had just finished my master's degree. So like now I was more qualified for the job than I was before. Two, I had documentation from our billing department about me being the highest reimbursed therapist on staff. Like they were making, essentially, I was getting $10,000 more a case than like what they had projected for that case when they took on that insurance company and stuff like that. So I had tangibles of showing like, this is how I increased your bottom line. And, you know, my boss, like if you know my story, I got fired twice in a month. She obviously, despite me having all of these facts and being super prepared, was like kind of just very passive aggressive and shutting me down and being like, well, if you want to talk to the CFO, you can go talk to him. And I'm like, okay, thanks for the support. It's not like this is impacting you at all because she wasn't really in charge of that stuff. And needless to say, I got fired like 3 weeks later. So that really didn't matter. But what's it called? I would just say like, make sure that also if you know that you're increasing the bottom line of a company, you have those metrics written down because that's huge at that point. You know, and the other thing I want to talk about, because you brought up equity, which is a really good thing for negotiating, just some cautions for taking on equity from a company, because you may never see the light of day for that. So if you are deciding between cold cash or equity, be really, really smart and don't put all your eggs in one basket.
I could not agree with that more, and I'm glad you made that distinction. So I think my recommendation is, if you get what you want money-wise plus equity, but, you know, don't allow them to cut your salary in half with this promise of equity. You know, I do a lot of consulting to startups, and they oftentimes try to offer us equity as opposed to our full, you know, fee. And so we definitely say you're more than welcome to give us equity in addition to the fee, or, you know, something like that. But, you know, it's really can get sticky if you start putting large chunks of, you know, of your salary that you into the equity bucket.
Yes, especially because you don't even know, especially because if you're getting equity, usually it's not a public company. In that case, you'd usually be getting shares. And so if you're getting equity, you really don't understand how like how the equity is structured. And that means the company could sell to an investor that now has 90% of the company, and your 1% is now worth like 0.00000000001%. Like you are really just taking a total gamble on that. So definitely make sure
the timing of it too. You never know when that's even going to happen. So,
you never know for sure. So I really like that you brought that up, and just also make sure that you guys are armed with all of the facts. And you know, if you're in negotiations, you can always say, this is the first like round. Let me write down everything that like we came to today, and let me think about it, and I'll touch base again later. Like you don't have to say yes in that room that day.
Yeah, you know, I talk about this in the book where, you know, number one, when you get a job offer, you should really ask time to think about it. I mean, even if it's the offer of your dreams, unless there's just some, you know, contingency where they have to know immediately, I always ask for at least a day to just digest, take a look at everything, because you want to look at that full benefit package and make sure you're not missing anything. So don't ever feel like you have to on the spot, you know, agree to, you know, a certain negotiation or to a package right when it's presented to you. And then the other thing I always say too is sometimes you can be in a job interview and they might offer you a job right on the spot. That's another time that can sometimes be a red flag, and you should still take the time to digest and to look everything over, and to again know what you're getting yourself into, because a lot of times, especially if you've been looking for a job for a long time and you finally get that call, you want to just say, okay, I'll take it, whatever it is, I'll take it. But no, always take some time. I think you should always counter actually with an initial job offer. I don't think there's any harm there. Even if it's an amount that you're okay with, I would just counter with something. It might be a slight, it might not even be a higher salary. It might just be something, you know, in your benefit package. But I believe it's worth it, unless you feel as though if you counter, they're going to rescind the whole deal. But, you know, unless there's that, I think there's only a limited amount of situations where that happens.
Yeah, I love that you said all of that just now, because I remember there was a statistic, I don't remember the exact number, but the majority of people accept the initial offer. And the reality is companies don't usually expect you. I mean, today they do kind of expect you to accept the initial offer because nobody's advocating for themselves to bring that whole thing full circle. But whatever you're accepting on that initial offer is setting the pace for your earning potential, as long long as you're with that company, and usually for what companies you get to, the offers you get after that company.
Yep, that's so true.
Because, future companies can pull your W-2 history. They can see what you made. You can't lie about your income to your next employer. And so if you're starting at one number, you're usually only going to get a 1 to 5% raise at the end of every year. You're starting to set your pace for that. So I personally say always ask for more.
Yeah.
Usually.
And I'll add this too. I believe if you're a woman, definitely ask for more.
Yes, definitely.
I mean, it's just, it's a fact that women are definitely still underpaid. So I believe they are probably even going to be lowballing you a little bit more based upon that.
And if you're nervous about throwing out a hard number, throw out a range. Like that's the thing I think that always really softens it. I remember my first ever 9-to-5 company that hired me, they were like, well, what do you want for salary? I was like, wait, what? I'm like 24. I'm like, nobody's ever asked me that before. And so I went and like asked all my coworkers what like I should ask for. And like I got ranges from 40,000 to 50,000. And I didn't even have my master's degree yet. And I was like going on and looking up what the average was. I was like, okay, I'm okay with this range of salary. And they actually came back $1,000 higher than the range I put in.
Wow.
And so I was like, oh, I really should have gone up and asked for more than I even expected. So like, that really taught me very early on, always ask for more. And I love that you brought up, because that was the company I got fired from with the crazy boss. I'll link all of the stories of how I got fired twice in under a month. I wrote a blog post about how I got fired twice in under a month, and I'll link it in the show notes if any of you guys are interested in that full story if you don't know it. But I knew I was going to be getting fired from this company, so on my lunch break, I went and interviewed for a new company. And during that interview, they essentially offered me the job that day. And I was like, yeah, sure. Like, I knew I was getting fired. I literally went back to my office and like an hour later got fired. So I was like, yeah, sure, I accept. But like, it's funny that you say it was a red flag, because my first day there, I tried quitting and she convinced me to stay. And then 3 weeks later, I was fired again. So definitely like that you said it was a red flag, because clearly it was.
If it's too good to be true sometimes. I mean, not saying it's always going to be a red flag, but if someone offers you a job at the interview, just still ask for time to think about it.
Oh, totally. All right. Any other like last minute tidbits of advice you want to leave us with? We've covered so much ground.
I will say just in terms of, I know we talked about this in the beginning, but in terms of just your career path and finding your purpose and your passion, one thing I always encourage is to always being open to evolving, always being okay, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. My career path has not been traditional. I mean, I went to law school and I've never practiced a day of law in my life, which I'm very happy about. But, people often ask me about that, and I say, look, it's just not something I wanted to do. I went for the skill set, and now I do business consulting, and now I wrote a book, and I'm doing speaking and talking to millennials and such. So you just never know where your career path or where your personal passions may lead you professionally. But just always stay open, and just don't be afraid of your dreams, and just keep going and just never stay in the same place.
I love that. And tell everyone where they can find you. And I will link her book, The Millennials Playbook to Adulting, below also for you guys.
Yes, they can find me. Everyone can find me at www.arikapierce.com. And Arika is actually spelled Arika, and last name is Pierce.com. And on my website, I have, you can get my book. I have a blog, and I also have a weekly email newsletter that comes out for millennials. So please check me out and check the book out. It's just actionable advice for millennials on all things related to adulting.
Love it. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Rachel. This was fun.
All right. How awesome was that, you guys? And Arika has kindly offered to give away one of the copies of her Millennials Playbook to Adulting. I will leave the instructions for that on my Instagram. So if you aren't already following me at The Confused Millennial, make sure you are. The easiest way to enter, though, is to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and send me an email with the screenshot of that to rachel@theconfusedmillennial.com. If you forget any of this stuff, again, on Instagram, I'll reiterate the instructions and I'll give you guys maybe some other bonus options, entry ways on my Instagram profile too. But if you've already subscribed, rated, and reviewed the podcast before, that already enters you in the podcast, so you're all set. As always, whenever I do these giveaways, they usually ask you guys to subscribe, rate, and review. So once you take a few seconds to go ahead and do that, you're pretty much set for the future. And I announce the winners on my Instagram, or I email them directly if you guys had sent me the screenshot. And as always, if there's any topics, guests, or anything that you guys want to see covered or hear more about on the podcast, also just send me an email, rachel@theconfusedmillennial.com. I love hearing from you guys. And until next week, I'll talk to you soon.